Andrea Waddell here, welcome to the studio. In today's video, I'm going to continue working on this abstracted piece in oil and cold wax. It's a 36 by 36. And last week, if you didn't see that video, there is part one that you can take a look at. And today is going to be part two, and hopefully I will resolve and complete it today. I hope you get something from watching this, and let's get to it. So again, this is oil and cold wax, and I'm going to start with removing distractions. Like all of this, as much as I like it, parts of it, I like this over here and this, it's all too much of the same thing. So I'm going to block out a whole area, this right here, to start with. And I'm going to keep these all in warm tones. So I've got my cold wax, and I'm also using my Galkid gel. And because I want to do some veils of color, I want more Galkid gel, and I'm going to add that to this little mixture, and I'm going to find my shapes. Sometimes these get stuck. And if you really here's a little tip that I will throw at you. If your brayers are not clean, and no matter what you do, if you clean them with Citrusol, what you can do, and they're not rolling out like this one, is you put them in a little baggie, you put some Murphy's oil soap, a little bit of warm water, a little bit of Murphy's oil soap, let it set overnight, and they will be spick and span good as new. What I'm mostly doing in this third layer is I'm trying to create some structure. I'm trying to create a composition, and I've started with this big shape, this center shape, and it's all over the place. There's that underlayer, so I'm bringing in, just really focusing on shapes and some value changes and trying to find areas of luminosity. And I'm also trying to harmonize that blue, that beautiful cobalt, gorgeous ultramarine blue with some other colors, which was my original intention when I was following the first magazine image from this luxury magazine that I love to flip through and get inspiration from. So now I'm just adding RNF pigment stick, and I'm trying to find a combination of color and shape that's pleasing. And so far, it's not doing what I want it to do. I'm finding little bits and pieces of luminosity, but the colors are clashing. So I'm adding paint, which is, something. It's not always a good idea when you're working in oil and cold wax. In fact, it's easy to want to do this, where instead of subtracting, there's just adding. And after a while, when you've added too much and too many layers, all the luminosity goes away, and no matter what you do. And that's what I'm going to keep trying to do, is kind of find areas where there's more luminosity and differences and changes in texture, but there's actually too much there. So I'm not going to be able to do that until I actually start aggressively scraping back. But for the moment, I'm making a composition choice, which is moving me away from my original intention, which was to work with that beautiful source image. And I created a design in Procreate in between painting sessions, which is something I like to do when I'm working on large pieces. And sometimes it works for me and it really solves the composition. But in this case, I was trying to create that structure, and I was actually adding to the chaos. But it becomes a great underlayer. But I'm thinking I'm finding structure and I'm finding composition. I'm really following the digital composition that I created, but it inevitably is taking me off in in a direction that has nothing to do with what I was originally trying to do. And then the whole thing gets too stiff and too forced, which is always the fine line and the dance to find when you're working in this way of keeping it free, working with areas that are chaotic, bringing structure in, but not getting too tight and too rigid and too forced. So in this painting session, it was getting a little forced, and I was really, really overworking the adding paint on top of paint. And I'm trying to add touches here and there, like this fluorescent pink, to bring in, something that's going to glow. But the colors are not working. That big shape isn't working. I've broken up some of the chaos, but I've replaced that with just a lot of paint. And it'll work out when I start scraping it back. But for now, I'm thinking when I was filming this that I was creating some structure, which was very ironic because I was actually just bringing in a different type of chaos. And I find myself doing this quite often when I'm painting, is I almost scare myself into, oh my God, like this right here, what in the world am I doing? And I get to a state of, I've pushed myself into a zone of I don't know what's happening. I don't like any of this, but I'm just going to keep going because I rely on the fact that ultimately I'll figure it out. But for right now, let's call this structured chaos. That big shape isn't working, the colors aren't working. I've got way too much of a value contrast. And when it's too much of a forced value contrast like that, it kind of, there's no subtlety to it. There's no shift from one value to another. So it's too extreme, and it looks kind of amateuresque. So I'm trying to add luminosity, so I'm throwing glitter at it, which I like to do. I think adding glitter is really fun. It's just a thing that I like to do. I like things that shine and that are glittery. But all of this becomes actually a really good next level underpainting. And I had thought when I had gotten here that I was resolving something. And I was trying to create a little house. And how about some little stars? And I'm going off into a different direction. So then I started here, got here, and I remembered this was my original intention, and I veered away. So I started in the next session by looking at this texture, and it's lumpy and it's clumpy, and I don't like any of that. I want the texture to look controlled, like I've made choices, and this just looks like I added and added and added and muddied. So I'm going to scrape back aggressively at any kind of texture that I don't like. And then I have these new things that are more nuanced that I want to start responding to, and I'm pulling back. A lot of aggressive scraping with my nifty tool until I've broken the whole thing apart, broken that shape up completely. It wasn't working, flipping it around in different directions before I start adding veils of transparent color. I think I started with a transparent orange. Now I'm getting closer to that image that I was working with. It's almost by osmosis, really. And then I added some transparent reds to unify all that scraped out part of it. And now I've got this blue that's starting to really work with these colors. And then I started folding in some greens, and lo and behold, I've gotten to a version of my source image that is exactly what I was hoping to find. So the moral of this story is, even if you start a composition, to start with an idea. What is the thing that you want to do? What's the general direction? Either you're abstracting from an image, or you're trying to create something with an idea in mind. And even if you start moving in different directions and it becomes chaotic, to remember what that earlier first intention was and to pull yourself back into it. I hope you got something from watching this video. And if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and do that. And I will see you next time.